John thought he had it figured out. He was 25, earning $41,000 a year. He set up one boring automatic transfer and then forgot about it. $200 a month straight into a low-cost index fund. That was the entire plan. No stock picking. No crypto moonshots. No second job at night. 40 years later, that account quietly crossed $1.2 million. And here's the part that stings. John was never special. He never earned six figures in his life. He never timed a market top. He never found the next Nvidia before anyone else did. He simply refused to touch the account. Meanwhile, his coworker, Carla, started the exact same year, earning more than he did. And she ended up with a fraction of what John had. Same market, same 40 years, two completely different endings. So what did John actually do that Carla didn't? And why are most people, maybe even you, quietly doing the one thing that guarantees you finish like Carla instead of John? Run the numbers and the gap gets uncomfortable fast. Let's be clear about what this story is and isn't. This is not a story about a genius. John could not explain what a price-to-earnings ratio is. He never read a single annual report. If you asked him to name 3 stocks he owned, he'd just shrug, because he owned all 500 companies in the index at once and never thought about any of them. That's the uncomfortable truth most finance content quietly hides from you. The person who wins with money is almost never the smartest person in the room. $200 a month is not an impressive number. It's about $6.50 a day. It's a couple of takeout lunches you could skip. Most people watching this could find $200 a month if they looked honestly at their statements. So if the amount is small and the strategy is boring, why do so few people actually end up with John's ending? Because the hard part was never the math. The hard part is 40 years of not flinching, and almost everyone flinches. They flinch at exactly the wrong moment. And that single decision quietly erases hundreds of thousands of dollars they never even see leave their account. Most people believe wealth is about finding the right investment. It is actually about surviving your own worst instincts for 4 decades. Here's what the data shows. Let's keep this fair and let's get specific. John and Carla both started in the same year, both at age 25. And Carla actually had the advantage. She earned $48,000 a year to John's $41,000. She was sharper than John, more ambitious, and far more interested in money than he ever was. Carla read the financial headlines every morning. Carla had strong opinions about the Federal Reserve. John, frankly, did not. They both opened the same kind of account, and they both started with the same $200 a month going into a fund tracking the S&P 500. Over the last 40 years, that index returned somewhere around 10% a year on average. Not every year, of course. Some years it dropped 30% and felt like the end of the world. Some years it jumped 25% and felt like easy money. But averaged across 4 full decades, the engine ran at roughly 10% annually. So both of them are pouring the identical $200 into the identical engine, earning the identical long-term return. On paper, they should end up in exactly the same place. They did not even come close. By the time they turned 65, John had crossed $1.2 million. Carla had about $218,000. Same contribution, same fund, same 4 decades of investing, a gap of nearly $1 million between 2 people who started with the exact same plan. And almost everyone assumes Carla must have contributed less, or picked a worse fund, or simply got unlucky with her timing. None of that is true. Carla's problem was never her portfolio. Carla's problem was Carla. And before you quietly feel superior to Carla, understand that the data says you are far more likely to be her than to be John. The average investor has trailed the market for 15 straight years now. Not because the market was cruel to them. Because they could not sit still. So let's walk through exactly what happened, year by year, decision by decision. Because every single mistake Carla made is a mistake that feels completely reasonable in the moment you make it. Here's what nobody tells you about the first 10 years. They are deeply, profoundly boring. John put in $200 a month for 10 straight years. That's $24,000 of his own money contributed. And after a full decade of discipline, his account was worth around $41,000. Let that number sink in for a second. 10 years of never missing. A payment, and he had a grand total of $17,000 in gains. That's it. $17,000 for 10 years of patience. This is the exact part that breaks people. You do everything right and the reward feels almost insulting. It does not feel like wealth. It feels like a slightly fancy savings account that you can't even spend. Most people look at that number after 10 years and quietly conclude the whole thing is a scam. They decide compound interest is just a lie that finance people tell you to feel smart. And honestly, in those early years, it kind of looks that way. The growth is so slow you can barely see it move, but here's what's actually happening underneath the surface. The account is not building money yet, it's building a base. And the size of that base is the only thing that determines how violent and how fast the growth becomes later. Carla, sitting at the exact same $41,000, looked at her account and felt the precise same disappointment that John felt. They were standing at the identical fork in the road. The only thing that mattered was what each of them did next. Most people quit right here, and Carla was no exception. Around year 11, the market hit a genuinely rough stretch. Carla's account, which had crawled all the way up to $41,000, dropped to $31,000 in a matter of months. $10,000 gone on paper in a market she didn't really understand. Every headline she read screamed that it was about to get much worse. So Carla did the most human thing imaginable. She stopped her $200 contribution to wait for things to calm down. Just temporarily, she told herself. Just until it felt safe to get back in again. Here's what nobody tells you about waiting until it feels safe. It never actually feels safe. The market does not ring a bell at the bottom to let you know. By the time the headlines finally turned positive again, prices had already recovered most of the drop. Carla restarted her contributions almost 2 full years later, after missing the single best buying window of her entire life. The shares that had been deeply on sale were now back to full price. She didn't just lose 2 years of contributions, she lost the cheapest shares she would ever have the chance to buy. John, by contrast, did absolutely nothing during all of it. He never once looked at the account during the crash. His $200 kept flowing in automatically, buying more and more shares precisely because they were cheaper. And here's the thing people get wrong about John. John did not have iron discipline. John had automation and apathy. He simply never logged into panic because he never logged in at all. This is the single most expensive habit in all of personal finance, and it actually has a name. Researchers call it the behavior gap. It's the difference between what the market returns and what the average investor actually earns in their own account. And the size of that gap is brutal. In a recent year where the market returned about 25%, the average equity investor captured only about 16.5%. In one single year, ordinary investors left more than 8 percentage points of return sitting on the table. Picture 2 people who both started that year with $100,000. The one who did absolutely nothing finished with $125,000. The average investor, jumping in and out, trying to be clever, finished with about $112,000. That's over $12,000 of difference in 12 months between sitting still and fidgeting. Now stretch that exact gap across 40 years of a lifetime. That, right there, is the entire story of John versus Carla. Carla didn't lose because she was poor. She lost because every single time the market scared her, she sold low and bought back high. She did it during the crash in year 11. She did it again during the panic in year 19. She did it a third time during the crisis in year 28. Each time it felt like the responsible, cautious, grown-up thing to do. Each time it quietly amputated another chunk of her future. And here's the cruelest detail of the whole thing. Carla worked far harder at investing than John ever did. She paid attention, she made moves, she felt in control. John ignored his account so completely that he sometimes forgot his own password. The person doing more lost. The person doing nothing won. That is not how almost anything else in life works, and that's exactly why people get it wrong. Here's what's actually happening inside the account while you sit on your hands. Compounding is not a straight line. It's a curve that starts almost flat and then bends sharply upward at the end. There's a simple shortcut called the rule of 72 that shows you why. Take 72 and divide it by your return. At 10% a year, your money doubles roughly every 7 years. So John's money doubled, and then that doubled amount doubled, and then that doubled again. The first doubling, from $20,000 to $40,000, feels tiny. Nobody gets excited about $40,000. But the same doubling at the end takes you from $600,000 to $1.2 million. The exact same doubling. The exact same 7 years. One adds $20,000, the other adds $600,000. Most people see the early doublings, decide it isn't working, and walk away right before the doublings get enormous. They quit at $40,000 and never see the jump to $80,000, to $160,000, to $320,000, to $640,000, and beyond. The math doesn't speed up. The numbers being doubled simply get bigger. That is the whole magic, and it is also the whole trap. Because the boring part and the explosive part are the same strategy. You just have to still be holding on when the curve finally bends. Now let's talk about the trap that catches the people who do understand all of this. They watch a video exactly like this one. They nod along the whole time. And then they say 5 small words that quietly cost them a fortune. I'll start next year. Meet Diana. Diana is 35 years old and she finally gets it. She starts the same $200 a month into the same index fund, fully committed this time, never panicking, doing absolutely everything right for 30 straight years. By 65, Diana has about $450,000. That is a genuinely good outcome by any normal measure. But remember, John has $1.2 million. Diana did everything that Carla failed to do. She never sold in a panic. She never stopped her contributions. She was a textbook perfect investor for 3 full decades, and she still finished with less than half of what John had. The only single thing John did that Diana didn't was start 10 years earlier. 10 years. That 1 decade of a 25-year-old's small, boring, almost invisible contributions was worth more than $700,000 to John by the end. Here's what nobody tells you about starting late. You are not just losing the years you skipped. You are losing all the years those early dollars would have spent multiplying on top of themselves. A dollar invested at 25 has 40 years to compound. A dollar invested at 35 has only 30. That extra decade is not 10% more time. Because of the way compounding stacks gains on top of previous gains. That extra decade can mean roughly double the final result. Read that again. The same dollar, 10 years earlier, is worth about twice as much at the finish line. The most valuable dollars you will ever invest in your whole life are the ones you invest when you have the least money, the least confidence, and the most reasons in the world to wait. Most people wait. That waiting is the single most expensive decision they will ever quietly make. Let's put real numbers on the cost of waiting, because vague advice never moves anyone. Say your goal is $1 million by 65, and the market keeps running at around 10%. If you start at 25, you need to invest roughly $160 a month. That's it. $160. If you wait until 35, that number jumps to about $440 a month to hit the same goal. Wait until 45, and it climbs to around $1,300 a month. And if you wait until 55, you'd need to pour in more than $5,000 every single month to land at the same million. Look at that progression again. $160, then $440, then $1,300, then $5,000. Every decade you wait doesn't just raise the bill a little, it multiplies it. The cruelest part is that the people who say they'll start once they earn more are actually making the climb steeper for their future selves with every year they delay. John didn't need a bigger salary, he needed a head start, and a head start is the one thing money literally cannot buy back later. The 25-year-old with $160 spare dollars is in a more powerful position than the 55-year-old with $5,000. That sentence sounds impossible until you watch the math do it. And now we arrive at the quietest thief of them all. This one doesn't crash. It doesn't panic. It doesn't make headlines. It just leaks every single day for 40 years straight. Fees. When Carla finally got serious about investing again, she did what felt like the smart adult thing to do. She hired an advisor who charged her 1% of her entire balance every single year, and that advisor put her into funds that charged another 1% on top of that. 2% a year total. That sounds like nothing. 1% feels like a rounding error you'd never even notice. It is not. On a long enough timeline, a 1% annual fee can quietly consume more than $500,000 of an ordinary person's lifetime returns. Some studies put that number north of $590,000. And 2% does far, far worse than double the damage. Here's why fees are so uniquely vicious. The fee is not charged on your gains. It's charged on your entire balance every single year, including all the money that was supposed to keep compounding for you. Every dollar skimmed off the top in fees is a dollar that never gets to multiply for the next 30 years. So you don't just lose the fee, you lose everything that fee would have become. John, meanwhile, paid almost nothing. His low-cost index fund charged about 0.03%. Carla paid more than 60 times that rate year after year after year to people who did not even beat the market on her behalf. Run the numbers, and a huge slice of Carla's missing million didn't vanish in any crash. It was quietly handed over, 1% at a time, to someone whose office was nicer than hers. The salesman who sold Carla that expensive product told her it was sophisticated. What it actually was a leak in the bottom of her boat that she paid extra to install. Let's make that leak concrete because 2% still sounds harmless. Imagine 2 identical investors, both with $100,000, both earning 10% for 30 years. The one paying near zero fees ends up with around $1.7 million. The one paying 2% a year ends up with closer to $1 million. That's $700,000 gone for a fee that felt like a rounding error on the statement. And here's the trick the industry relies on. The fee is shown to you as a tiny percentage, never as a final dollar amount, because no honest person would knowingly hand a stranger $700,000 to underperform a fund they could have bought for free. This is exactly how high-fee annuities and loaded mutual funds get sold. A friendly advisor uses words like guaranteed, like protection, like peace of mind. Most people hear those words and never once translate the 1% into the 7 figures it quietly represents over a lifetime. Run the numbers before you sign anything. Always ask the same blunt question. What is the total annual cost in real dollars over 30 years? If the person across the desk can't or won't answer that in plain numbers, you already have your answer. John never had that conversation because John never hired anyone. His fee was so small it was almost a joke. And that joke was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to him. There's one more version of getting it wrong, and it's the one that feels the safest of all. Meet Maya. Maya watched everything that happened to Carla in the crashes and decided the stock market was simply too risky for someone like her. So Maya did what felt like the responsible thing. She put her $200 a month into a high-yield savings account earning around 4%, fully protected, government insured, never dropping a single cent. Maya never lost one night of sleep over the market. And after 40 years of perfect, disciplined saving, Maya had about $230,000. She felt completely safe the entire time. And that feeling of safety cost her roughly $1 million. Here's what nobody tells you about playing it safe. Avoiding the stock market doesn't actually remove risk from your life. It just trades a loud, visible risk for a silent, invisible one. Maya didn't risk a market crash, that's true. Instead, she quietly guaranteed that inflation would slowly outrun her every year, and that she'd arrive at 65 with a fraction of what she would actually need to retire. The fear of losing money in the short term cost Maya the entire use of compounding over the long term. The choice that felt the safest turned out to be the most expensive choice on this entire list. Volatility is simply the price of admission for the only engine that reliably turns ordinary people into millionaires. Maya refused to pay that price, so she never got the ride. And the painful irony is that the years she was most afraid of, the crashes, were the exact years John was quietly buying the most shares. Let's pause and put all 4 of them side by side, because the comparison is the whole point. 4 people. The exact same $200 a month. John, who started at 25 and never touched it, finished with $1.2 million. Carla, who started with him but panicked, paused, and paid heavy fees, finished with $218,000. Diana, who was perfect but started 10 years late, finished with $450,000. And Maya, who was too scared to invest at all, finished with $230,000. The contribution was identical for all 4. The only variables were time, patience, fees, and fear. Most people, when they hear this, immediately ask the wrong question. They ask, which fund did John pick? But John's fund was nothing special. Anyone could have bought it. The question that actually matters is, why was John the only one of the 4 who left it completely alone? Because that, and nothing else, is what separated a millionaire from 3 people who did almost everything right. So let's strip John's entire strategy down to what he actually did, because it's almost embarrassingly simple. First, he automated the contribution so it left his account the same day his paycheck arrived, before he could feel it or spend it. He never once had to find the willpower to invest, because the decision was made one time and then never again. Second, he bought a single broad, low-cost index fund and never tried to pick a better one. He owned the whole market, so he never had to be right about any one company. Third, he kept his fees near zero, which meant nearly every dollar of growth stayed his. And fourth, the one that actually mattered most, he did nothing for 40 years. He didn't check it during crashes. He didn't celebrate during booms. He treated the account like a locked room he wasn't allowed to enter. Notice what's not on that list. There's no stock picking, no market timing, no special knowledge, no expensive advisor. No secret. Everything John did, you could set up this week in under an hour, and most of it you'd never have to think about again. The strategy was never the rare part. The rare part was the temperament. Most people can copy John's account in an afternoon. Almost nobody can copy his patience for 40 years. And that gap between knowing what to do and being able to leave it alone is the entire reason most people are doing this wrong. So here's the twist that reframes this entire story, and it's the part almost no one ever talks about. The $200 a month is not what made John a millionaire. Look closely at where John's wealth actually came from over time. In the first 20 years, John contributed $48,000 of his own money, and his account grew to around $150,000. Decent, but not even close to life-changing. Now look at the last 7 years all by themselves. It grew by more than $500,000. More wealth was created in the last 7 years than in the first 33 years combined. And John didn't contribute a single penny more in those final years than he did in the very first ones. The exact same $200 a month the whole way through. The money didn't suddenly start working harder at the end. It worked on a far bigger base. This is the secret the boring first decade was quietly hiding the entire time. You are not building money in the early years. You are building the launch pad. And every person who quits, who pauses, who starts late, who leaks it to fees, they all quit before the launch. They walk away during the boring part, never knowing they were standing right next to the explosion. Here's the one line worth actually remembering from all of this. John didn't get rich because of the $200. He got rich because of the 40 years he refused to interrupt it. The contribution was never the hard part. The not touching it was the entire game. So the next time you see a headline promising the one perfect stock, or a guru selling a strategy that supposedly beats the market, ask yourself one quiet question. If $200 boring a month, left completely alone, turns into more than $1 million, then what exactly am I trying to beat? The truth is you were never really competing against the market at all. You were only ever competing against your own urge to interfere with it. John won, not because he was smart, but because he was still. He automated one small decision and then got out of his own way for 40 years. You can do this exact math on any free calculator in about 90 seconds. And it will tell you the same thing it quietly told John decades ago. The boring path works. It almost always works. The only reason it ever fails is that people simply cannot bear to leave it alone. So start smaller than feels impressive. Start sooner than feels comfortable. Keep your fees as close to zero as you possibly can. And then, no matter what the headlines scream at you, do the single hardest thing in all of investing. Nothing. Make the decision that matches the math, not the one that matches the fear in someone else's headline. Because in the end, the market does not reward the smartest person in the room. It rewards the one who could sit still the longest.